The rain poured down in thin, cold lines, soaking the black veil over Clara's face. Her hands trembled as she clutched the white rose meant for her mother's casket. The church smelled of wet clothes, perfume, and sorrow. Everyone's eyes were on her, the grieving daughter, the girl whose life had changed forever just 5 days earlier when her mother had been found dead in her own kitchen. Clara's chest felt hollow, her mind a blur. She barely noticed when Michael, her boyfriend of 2 years, took slow, deliberate steps toward her. His suit was sharp, his expression unreadable. The murmurs in the crowd softened, as though the air itself was holding its breath. He reached into his coat pocket. Clara blinked through tears, confused. Then, before the coffin was lowered into ground, before the priest could finish his prayer, Michael dropped to one knee, right there in front of her mother's casket, and opened a small, black velvet box. The gasp that escaped Clara's mouth was echoed by the crowd. Some looked shocked, others appalled. "I love you, Clara," Michael said, voice breaking just enough to sound genuine. "Life is short, too short. Your mother's passing reminded me. I don't want to waste another second without you. Will you marry me?" Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to think. He had been supportive since the death, holding her, making her eat, wiping away her tears. And yet, something about the timing felt strange, wrong even. The priest froze mid-sentence. People whispered. Clara's eyes darted to her mother's coffin. The finality of it, the smell of wet soil waiting to cover it, and then to Michael's face. His eyes were wet, but his lips carried the faintest trace of a smile. Clara didn't know that just 4 nights ago, those same hands holding the ring box had been wrapped tightly around her mother's throat. Before she could even process the moment, before she could decide whether to say yes or no, a sharp cry erupted from the back of the crowd. "Someone here knows the truth." The voice was shaky, female, and full of fear. Every head turned. Clara's pulse quickened. Michael's jaw tightened. The woman stepped forward, a neighbor she vaguely recognized. Her face pale, her hands trembling. "I saw who was at your house the night your mother died." Clara Lewis had always considered her life quiet. She was 27, lived in a modest apartment in the heart of Cedarbrook, and worked as a florist. Her mother, Ellen Lewis, was her anchor, a fiercely independent woman who had raised her alone after Clara's father walked out when she was 8. Their relationship was more than just mother and daughter. They were best friends. They had a routine: Sunday brunch at Ellen's house, movie nights on Thursdays, and spontaneous phone calls about everything from baking recipes to neighborhood gossip. Michael Hart entered Clara's life at the flower shop 2 years ago. He was charming, good-looking, and knew exactly what to say. He claimed he was a marketing consultant, often traveling for work, but when he was in town, he made sure Clara felt like the only woman in the world. Ellen, however, was never completely sold on him. "He's polished," Ellen had said once, stirring her tea. "But sometimes polished hides cracks." Clara had laughed it off. Her mother was overprotective. That was all. Life carried on normally until Tuesday evening, the day that changed everything. Clara was working late at the shop when Michael called to say he was catching up with friends. By the time she got home, it was almost 9 p.m. She noticed 2 missed calls from her mother, but assumed it was nothing urgent. She would call her back in the morning, but the morning never came for Ellen. It was around 7:15 a.m. when Clara's phone rang again. This time, it was Officer Daniels, a longtime family acquaintance from the Cedarbrook Police Department. "Clara, I need you to come to your mother's house." His voice was heavy, cautious. Her stomach twisted. "Why? Is she okay?" There was a pause. "Just come. Please." The drive to Ellen's house was a blur of flashing street signs and pounding heartbeats. As soon as she pulled up, she saw 2 police cars parked out front, their lights silent but spinning. Yellow tape flapped in the morning wind. Her legs felt like they'd turned to stone as she pushed past the front gate. The moment she saw the stretcher, her mother's body under a white sheet, the air left her lungs. "Mom!" she screamed, rushing forward. Officer Daniels caught her by the arms before she could pull the sheet back. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said gently, his eyes full of pity. "She's gone." Clara's hand shook violently. What happened? Daniels hesitated. We think it might be foul play. Those words didn't make sense. Foul play? Ellen was healthy. Ellen was careful. She didn't even open the door to strangers. Michael arrived minutes later, looking stunned and disheveled. He pulled Clara into his arms, whispering, I'm so sorry, baby. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. At the time, his words were comforting. She didn't know yet that they were also a lie. The initial investigation moved quickly. Detectives noted no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing stolen. A half-empty cup of tea sat on the kitchen counter, still faintly warm when they arrived. The back door was unlocked. Looks like she knew whoever came in, Detective Morris said. Clara was interviewed for hours, going over her mother's last days in excruciating detail. She mentioned Michael, but only in passing. After all, why would she suspect him? Still, something gnawed at her. Ellen had called twice the night before she died. Twice. Clara hadn't picked up. What if she had? Could she have saved her? As the day dragged on, Daniels pulled Clara aside. Listen, he said softly, if you remember anything anyone knew in her life, any disagreement she had, you need to tell us. Clara shook her head. She didn't fight with anyone. Everyone loved her. Daniels gave a slow, sad nod. Sometimes it's the ones we think love us back. That night, Clara sat alone in her apartment, replaying every moment of the past week. Michael had been calling constantly, checking on her, offering to help with funeral arrangements. It was comforting, yes, but also overwhelming. Then came Friday, the day of the funeral, the day Michael did the unthinkable. She didn't know it yet, but the investigation was about to take a turn that would drag her into a darkness she never imagined. And the person holding her hand through it all might be the very one who caused it. The funeral was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft sniffles of mourners and the slow, rhythmic voice of the priest. Clara sat in the front row, numb, her black gloves clenched in her lap. Beside her, Michael held her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in what looked like comfort but felt oddly rehearsed. Clara had barely slept. Her nights were haunted by the image of her mother's covered body being wheeled away, and the unanswered questions that piled higher each day. She told herself she needed to stay strong for the funeral, to give her mother the dignity she deserved. But then Michael's proposal, right there beside the coffin, shattered whatever composure she had left. It wasn't just the timing. It was the eyes of everyone staring, the whispers creeping to the church like smoke. Clara's cheeks burned, but she forced a weak smile, unsure if she was reacting to love or pressure. Before she could respond, a voice from the back interrupted the moment. Someone here knows the truth. It was Mrs. Holloway, Ellen's elderly neighbor, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for knowing everyone's business. Her cane clicked against the tile as she hobbled forward. I saw someone at Ellen's house the night she died, Mrs. Holloway said, her voice trembling. And it wasn't anyone from around here. The crowd shifted, a ripple of unease passing through them. Michael's hand squeezed Clara's tighter. Too tight. Who? The priest asked softly. Mrs. Holloway's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Michael before she spoke again. Tall man, dark coat, came in through the back gate, stayed inside for maybe an hour, left just after 10. Clara's stomach turned. 10 p.m.? That was around the time her mother's calls went unanswered. Michael chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. With all due respect, Mrs. Holloway, you can barely see across the street. It was probably the mailman or something. Her neighbor stiffened, eyes narrowing. I know what I saw. The tension was suffocating. The priest quickly resumed the service, clearly eager to steer the event back to its intended purpose. But Clara's thoughts were no longer on the prayers. They were on that timeline and Michael's defensiveness. After the funeral, Detective Morris pulled Clara aside near the church entrance. Can we talk? Privately. They stepped into a quiet corridor. Mrs. Holloway came to us yesterday, Morris said, lowering his voice. She claimed she saw someone at your mother's the night she died. A man. Clara's throat tightened. She said the same thing just now. Morris nodded. We've been trying to match that to anyone who might have had reason to visit. Do you know if your mother was expecting someone that night? Clara shook her head slowly. Not that I know of. She didn't date much, and she never mentioned a visitor. Morris hesitated, then added, We also checked your mother's phone records. There was a call made to her landline at 8:57 p.m. that night. Lasted about 2 minutes. The numbers registered to Michael Hart. Clara blinked, stunned. Michael? My Michael? Yes. Did he tell you he called her? Her heart pounded in her ears. No. He said he was out with friends. Morris' jaw tightened. We'll be speaking to him. Back at her apartment that evening, Clara confronted Michael. Why didn't you tell me you called my mom the night she died? She asked, arms folded tightly across her chest. Michael didn't flinch. I was checking in on her. I wanted to ask if she needed help with anything. It was nothing. Nothing? Clara's voice cracked. Why didn't you mention before? He sighed heavily. Because I knew how you'd react, suspicious, just like now. I'm trying to be here for you. Clara, not get interrogated. Her eyes searched his face, looking for cracks, but he turned away, busying himself with taking off his jacket. Do you have proof you were with your friends that night? She pressed. Michael froze for half a second before replying. I don't have to prove anything to you. The words landed like a slap. The next morning, Clara's phone buzzed. It was Detective Morris. We checked your mother's kitchen, he said. The teacup we found? It tested positive for traces of a sedative, strong enough to make her unconscious within minutes. Clara's breath caught. And here's the thing, Morris continued. We confirmed the sedative was purchased online by someone using Michael Hart's credit card. The room spun. You need to be careful around him, Morris warned. Until we can bring him in, don't let him know we're looking too closely. But Michael had already been watching her closely, and that night, she would find something in her apartment that made her blood run cold. The warning from Detective Morris echoed in Clara's head all day. Be careful around him. But how? Michael had a key to her apartment. He knew her routines, her friends, her habits. If he suspected she was turning against him, she didn't know what he might do. By the time night fell, Clara was exhausted, emotionally and physically. She thought about staying with a friend, but she didn't want Michael to notice she was avoiding him. That would only raise more suspicion. When she opened the door to her apartment, she froze. Something felt wrong. The living room was tidy, but too tidy. The throw blanket she always left draped over the couch was folded perfectly. The faint scent of Michael's cologne lingered in the air, though he wasn't supposed to come by that day. Her chest tightened as she stepped inside. She locked the door behind her. Clara moved to the bedroom, tried to convince herself she was imagining things, until she saw the small wooden box on her dresser. It was a jewelry box her mother had given her, one she hadn't opened since Ellen's death because it was too painful. Now it sat slightly ajar. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, her mother's gold locket was missing. Her breath came fast. She knew exactly where she'd last seen it, around her mother's neck, the day before she died. Panic surged through her. She searched the rest of the apartment, and in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, beneath a pile of scarves, she found something she knew didn't belong to her, a small amber glass bottle. The label was torn, but a word was still visible. Zolpidem. Her heart dropped. That was the sedative Detective Morris had mentioned. Her phone rang. She jumped, fumbling to answer. It was Michael. Hey, babe. His voice was casual, almost cheerful. Just wanted to check in. You sounded upset earlier. Clara gripped the phone tightly, her voice trembling. Michael, were you here today? A pause. Why? Something wrong. You have a key, she pressed. Were you here? Another pause. Longer this time. Then a chuckle. Clara, you're acting paranoid. I came by to leave dinner for you. It's in the fridge. I thought you'd be happy. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the bottle in her hand. Michael's tone shifted, lower, almost warning. I hope you're not listening to that old bat next door or your police friend. People love to stir trouble. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Michael, where's my mother's locket? Silence. Then why would I have it? But she could hear the smile in his voice. The next morning, Clara met Detective Morris in a quiet cafe, sliding the bottle across the table wrapped in a scarf. "This was in my apartment," she whispered. Morris' eyes narrowed. "If this belongs to him, we can tie it directly to your mother's cause of death. But you need to understand people like him. If he's guilty, they can sense when someone is closing in." Clara swallowed hard. "So what do I do?" Morris leaned closer. "You act normal. Until we have enough to bring him in, you keep him close." Her stomach churned at the thought. Pretend everything was fine with the man who might have... That night, Michael showed up unannounced, carrying takeout and a bottle of wine. "You've been distant," he said, setting the food on the counter. "We should talk. I hate feeling like we're not on the same side." Clara forced a smile, her heart hammering. "You're right. I'm just tired." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know I'd do anything for you, right?" She nodded, trying not to flinch. He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'd do anything to keep you." It was meant to sound loving, but in the quiet of the apartment, it sounded like a threat. The next day, Morris called her with new information. Someone had used her mother's credit card hours after her death, and the purchase could be traced back to Michael's name. And the location of that purchase? A pawn shop, where the owner claimed a man had sold a gold locket. Detective Morris' voice was steady over the phone, but Clara could hear the weight behind his words. The pawn shop owner remembered him, Morris said. Tall man, dark hair, said his name was Mike. Sold the locket for cash. Clara gripped the edge of her kitchen counter. "And you're sure it was hers?" "My mother's." "Yes," Morris replied. "The owner said it had an inscription, 'To Ellen, forever in my heart.' It's being held as evidence now." Clara closed her eyes. It was real. The necklace she'd seen missing from her mother's dresser, the one she thought had been lost forever, was now the smoking gun linking Michael to her mother's death. But Morris wasn't celebrating yet. "This isn't enough for a clean arrest," he warned. "If we go in now, his lawyer will claim it was a gift from your mother. We need him to slip. We need him to say something or do something that ties him to the night she died." Clara's mouth went dry. "And how do we do that?" There was a pause on the line. "We set a trap." The plan was risky, maybe even dangerous, but it was the only way to get him talking. Clara would invite Michael over, pretend she was ready to accept his proposal, and casually bring up her mother's death in a way that might make him reveal something. Everything would be recorded. 2 detectives would be nearby, ready to step in if things went bad. Clara hated it. Pretending to be in love with him, letting him sit close, letting him believe she was his. But she hated the idea of him walking free even more. That evening, she sent a text. "Come over tonight. We need to talk." He replied almost instantly, "On my way." The knock on her door came at exactly 8 p.m. Michael stood there in a black button-down shirt, hair perfectly styled, holding a bouquet of lilies, her mother's favorite. "I thought you might like these," he said, smiling. Her stomach churned. She stepped aside to let him in, careful to keep her voice light. They sat on the couch. Clara poured them both glasses of wine, her hand trembling slightly as she handed his to him. "I've been thinking," she began, looking down at her lap, "about what you said about life being too short. About us." Michael leaned in, eyes bright, and she forced a small smile. "I think you're right. Maybe we should get married." His smile widened. "Clara, that's..." "But there's one thing I need," she interrupted, her tone soft. "Before we start a life together, I need to know everything. About that night." His smile faltered just slightly. "What night?" "The night my mother died," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I need to know who was at her house." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "You're still hung up on that? Clara, it's not healthy." "She called me twice that night," Clara continued, her voice trembling. "And then she was gone. Don't you think I deserve to know what happened?" There was a long pause. Michael sipped his wine slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "You do know, don't you?" she whispered. He set the glass down and leaned closer, his voice low. Some things are better left buried. Her heart pounded. She kept her face neutral, even as her mind screamed. "Did you?" she started. He smirked faintly. "If I did, it was for us. You'll understand one day." Her blood ran cold. In the next room, Detective Moore's recorder caught every word. But before they could move in, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Clara, and his eyes narrowed. "You've been talking to the police." Clara froze. "What?" He stood, towering over her now. "You think I don't see the little games? You think I can't tell when someone's setting me up?" Her pulse quickened. The plan was unraveling. And then 3 sharp knocks at the door. "Cedarbrook Police. Open up." Michael's expression changed in an instant, and Clara saw it. The flash of rage, the calculation in his eyes. Then he bolted for the back door. Michael didn't hesitate. The moment the police knocked, he darted toward the kitchen, yanking open the back door. Clara's voice caught in her throat, but before she could scream, Detective Morris and Officer Daniels were already in pursuit. "Michael Hart, stop!" Daniels barked. Michael leapt down the back steps 2 at a time, his shoes slapping against the wet pavement of the alley. The rain had started again, slicking the ground, making each footfall dangerous. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, heart hammering, watching the chase disappear into the darkness. Within seconds, she was surrounded by uniformed officers. Morris returned minutes later, shaking his head, his hair dripping. "He's gone," he muttered, clearly furious. But not for long. Clara's voice shook. What happens now?" "We get a warrant," Morris said. "We search everywhere he's ever been. His apartment, his car, any storage units. He slipped through our fingers tonight, but his mistake was running. Now we got enough to push the DA." 2 days later, the warrant came through. Clara wasn't allowed at the search, but Morris called her halfway through. "We found something," he said. "What?" There was a pause. A set of photographs. Old ones. From before you even met him. Clara frowned. "Of what?" "Of you. And your mother." The words made her stomach twist. "What do you mean of me?" "Like from family gatherings." "No," Morris said. "Candid shots. You didn't know you were being photographed. Some of them are years old. Ones from when you were in high school." Clara's grip on the phone tightened. "Why would he have those?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Morris said grimly. "But if I had to guess, this wasn't some random relationship. He's been watching you for a long time." The revelation made her skin crawl. Every moment she thought had been coincidence. Bumping into Michael at the coffee shop, him claiming to have just discovered her flower shop, suddenly felt like a setup. And then came the biggest blow. Tucked into the envelope of photographs was a worn, folded letter addressed to Ellen Lewis. Morris read it to her over the phone. "Ellen, you ruined everything before. But this time, I'm not letting you get in the way. She'll be mine and you won't stop it." Clara's breath caught. "What does that mean?" "It means," Morris said, "this wasn't about money or an argument gone wrong. This was personal. He planned to kill her." That night, Clara barely slept. The images of the letter, the photographs, the way Michael had smirked when he half confessed, they haunted her. She couldn't understand the depth of his obsession. By morning, Morris called again. "We traced his last known location to an old fishing cabin outside Cedarbrook," he said. "It's isolated. If he's hiding, that's where he'll be." Clara's stomach dropped. "And if he's there, then we bring him in. Tonight." Hours later, Clara watched from a distance as the SWAT team surrounded the cabin. Her heart raced as she saw the faint glow of a light inside. Through the trees, she caught a glimpse of Michael's silhouette, standing at the window, staring out into the woods. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward her direction. Even from far away, she could tell he was smiling. The air around the cabin was heavy and damp, the kind that made every sound sharper. Clara stood behind the police cars, her hands jammed into the pockets of her coat, trying to steady her breathing. The SWAT officers moved silently, their dark uniforms blending with the trees. Detective Morris was beside her, one hand lightly gripping her arm. "Stay back, no matter what happens. Do you understand?" Clara nodded, though her eyes stayed locked on the faint outline of Michael inside the cabin. That same sick smile still lingered on his face, as if he knew the police were there and didn't care. "Michael Hart." Officer Daniel's voice boomed through the loudspeaker. "Come out with your hands up." A long pause. The only sound was the rustle of wind through the pines. Then Michael stepped away from the window. Seconds later, the cabin door creaked open. He walked out slowly, wearing a black hoodie and jeans, hands in his pockets. "No need for all the theatrics," he called out, his voice calm. "I'm right here." The officers tensed. "Hands where we can see them." Daniels barked. Michael obeyed, sort of. He pulled his hands from his pockets, but in one of them was a small silver chain. Even from a distance, Clara recognized it instantly. Her mother's locket. "You looking for this?" Michael's eyes locked on Clara. "It belongs to her now." Clara's chest tightened, but before she could speak, Morris stepped forward. "Put it on the ground, Michael. Now." Michael's smile widened. "Why? Afraid I'll tell the truth before you do?" The officers began to move in. Michael raised his voice, directing at Clara. "She doesn't know, does she? Doesn't know why I did it." "Michael," Morris warned, but Michael kept talking, his tone taunting. "She thought her mother hated me for no reason. But Ellen knew me before, years before." Clara's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Michael tilted his head, still smirking. "Ask her about the boy she sent away, the one she ruined. I just returned the favor." The officer seized a moment. Two of them rushed forward, grabbing Michael by the arms. "But he didn't fight," he laughed. "You think this is over? She'll come see me. She'll want answers. And when she does..." His voice trailed off into another dark smile. They dragged him to a squad car, the locket swinging in his grip until it was ripped from his hand, and bag as evidence. Back at the station, Morris debriefed Clara. "He's saying your mother knew him years ago," Morris said. "Before you met him. We'll dig into that." Clara's voice shook. "Do you think it's true?" Morris leaned back in his chair. "With men like him, it's usually worse than they admit." But Clara couldn't shake Michael's words. The idea that her mother had known him and kept it from her burned in her chest. That night, Clara sat alone in her apartment, staring at the locket in its evidence bag. She had to know the truth. The next morning, she drove to her mother's oldest friend, Aunt May, who had known Ellen since they were teenagers. When Clara asked about Michael, Aunt May's expression changed instantly, a mix of fear and recognition. "I hoped you'd never hear that name again," Aunt May whispered, "because the last time he was in your life, you were just a little girl." Aunt May's tiny living room smelled faintly of old books and lavender. Clara sat stiffly on the floral couch, her fingers clenched around a mug of tea she had no intention of drinking. Across from her, Aunt May rocked gently in her chair, eyes lowered, as if the floor could tell the story for her. "You were 7, Aunt May began softly. "It was summer. Your mother and I had taken you to the community fair. You had that little blue dress with daisies on it. I remember because you spilled ice cream on the front." Clara frowned. What does this have to do with Michael? Aunt May's lips pressed into a thin line. That was the first time Ellen saw him. He was a teenager back then. 17. Trouble even then. He'd hang around the park, skipping school, always watching people. And that day, he was watching you. A cold shiver ran down Clara's spine. Ellen confronted him. Aunt May continued. Told him to stay away from you. He laughed in her face. A week later, he tried to follow you home from school. Ellen reported him. He disappeared after that. We thought, she shook her head, we thought he was gone for good. Clara's stomach churned. So all this time? Aunt May's eyes glistened. He's been waiting, Clara. Waiting for you to grow up. Waiting to get back at Ellen for keeping you from him. The words sank like stones in Clara's chest. Her relationship with Michael hadn't been chance. It had been an obsession decades in the making. She drove straight to Detective Morris' office, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. When she told him what Aunt May had said, He didn't look surprised. "This fits with what we found in his storage unit," Morris said, sliding a file across the desk. Inside were photographs of Clara from nearly every stage of her life. School events, grocery store trips, even a shot of her through her apartment window from just a year ago. But there was something else in the folder. A notebook. Morris flipped it open. He kept journals. About you. Pages and pages. Plans for when he would make you his. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. "And my mother?" Morris tapped one page where Michael's handwriting scrawled. "Ellen stands in the way. She always has. But she's older now. Softer. This time, she won't stop me." By evening, the DA's office was preparing for trial. The locket, the sedative, the letter, the photographs, and now the notebook painted a chilling picture. But Morris wanted one last piece to ensure there was no escape route for Michael in court. "We're going to bring him in for questioning tomorrow," Morris said. "You don't have to be there. In fact, I'd prefer you weren't." Clara hesitated. "And if he says something?" Morris gave a grim smile. "We'll be recording every word." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Michael's face, that smug smile when he said he'd done it for us. And despite the fear, despite the disgust, part of her wanted to hear him admit it again directly to her. The next morning, without telling Morris, she walked into the station. Officers shot her uneasy glances, but no one stopped her as she headed toward the observation room. Through the one-way glass, she saw him. Michael sat casually in the interrogation chair, cuffs on his wrists, leaning back like he owned the place. When the detectives entered, he glanced at the mirror, straight at where Clara stood, and grinned. "I was wondering when she'd show up," he said. Clara's breath caught when Michael looked straight toward the mirror. Rationally, she knew he couldn't see her through the glass, but the precision of his grin felt like a knife sliding between her ribs. Detective Morris took the chair opposite him, sliding a recorder onto the table. Officer Daniels stood in the corner, arms folded. "Michael Hart," Morris began, his voice steady, "you're here in connection with the murder of Ellen Lewis. We have enough evidence to take this to the DA, but this is your chance to speak for yourself." Michael chuckled, leaning back in the chair. "You think I'm afraid of court? Please. Juries eat up a good love story." "This wasn't love," Morris said coldly. "This was obsession. Predatory. You targeted a woman for years, and when her mother tried to protect her, you killed her." Michael's eyes flickered with irritation. "You talk like I didn't earn her." From behind the glass, Clara's fists clenched. Morris slid the photograph of Ellen's locket across the table. "This was around her neck the night she died. You sold it 2 hours later." Michael smirked. "And she could have given it to me." Morris didn't flinch. "You drugged her tea with zolpidem, the same batch we found in Clara's apartment, the one you planted to intimidate her." For a moment, Michael was silent. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and spoke in a slow, deliberate tone. "You wanted to say it? Fine. Ellen thought she could take Clara from me again. But this time, she was old, weak. I barely had to press." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. From behind the glass, Clara's breath hitched. Her knees nearly buckled. "Why?" Morris asked quietly. "Why go this far?" Michael's expression softened in a way that made it even more chilling. "Because she's mine. She always was. And if I had to erase the one person standing in the way, then so be it. People die every day." Morris nodded once to Daniels, who stepped forward and ended the interview. "We're done here." As they led Michael out, he turned his head toward the glass again. His lips moved, forming 2 words Clara could read without hearing them. "You're mine." The trial moved swiftly. The evidence, the confession, the sedative, the photographs, the letter, left the jury with no room for doubt. Michael Hart was found guilty of first-degree murder and stalking, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Clara sat through every day of the trial, her face unreadable, though her hands trembled beneath the table. She wanted to see justice, but more than that, she wanted to be free of the shadow he had cast over her entire life. When the verdict was read, she didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply stood, walked out of the courtroom, and stepped into the crisp autumn air. Weeks later, she visited her mother's grave for the first time since the funeral. She brought lilies, fresh, white, the kind her mother had always loved. "I know now, Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. "I know what you did for me. You kept me safe for as long as you could. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in months, she felt a sliver of peace. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of Detective Morris waiting by his car. He nodded at her, a small gesture, but one that said it's over. And for the first time, she believed it.